I happen to have inherited a fair number of figurines from my late father, who was also an enthusiast for the American Civil War. That's essentially where I got it from. His personal favourite general happened to be a very obscure, unusual individual that many may not have heard of.
No photographs.
He goes by the name of Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson. I think it appropriate to have him here placed, considering we are talking about his old alma mater, the Virginia Military Institute. And with respect to 2020-14's or 2020-15's, The Field of Lost Shoes, directed by Sean McNamara, a story of 7 young cadets from the Virginia Military Institute who would serve under John C. Breckinridge on the battlefield at Newmarket Gap on the 15th of May, 1864. Through their story, we see what life was like during this turbulent time at the old institute, with lightly navigating the politic, a smidge of contrived romance, and some stilted and awkward acting.
It ends horribly for the boy.
Oh, please, sir.
Could we have Duck fetch John Wise? Handle this within the barracks.
And at times some advertly convenient overtones that resemble a blatant rewriting of certain histories. Now, I've never been particularly all that interested in causality. Some people would like to argue and indulge over what motivated secession for the Cotton States beyond the, bleeding obvious. This is also a point of contention for the North also, that emancipation was a principal war aim, although...
I signed up to preserve the Union, but I think the president did the right thing. What's the use of uniting the country by force and leaving slavery in place?
It sure rile up those Johnny Rebs. I mean, they're going to think old man Lincoln incited the slaves just to rise up against them.
Well, why shouldn't they? Freeing the slaves wasn't a war aim when this all began, but war changes things. It sorts things out.
Personally, what I find most intriguing about this history are the individual stories about certain generals, to their generalship and friendships, brother against brother, to the bravery, to the insanity, and the tragedy that unfolded through this horrifying ordeal that was the American Civil War. If focusing on causality, and in the belief that this represents yet another modern effort to deliver neo-Confederate propaganda, I honestly don't think it half bad in at least that respect. Unapologetic, this is a story about 7 cadets at the Virginia Military Institute, and who would partake in the Battle of Newmarket. Is there embellishment? Yes, including having one proclaimed to now hold of abolitionist beliefs.
We should not be fighting to keep people in chains.
Still, and with respect to causality, one of the movie's strengths is with how it highlights different causes for individuals who would serve the Confederacy.
I'd like to know what you think of the war, what your plans are for afterwards. Young man?
We find ourselves invaded by a conquering army, whom I must consider foreign invaders.
Well, my family's owned a plantation for close to 150 years. So I'm defending my heritage and my future.
I think war is stupid and cruel. And nowhere near as necessary as those leading the fighting like to tell themselves.
My family and my home were burned. I'll kill as many blues tomorrow as God permits.
While I might find it silly to argue against the principal cause for secession, to the desire with establishing a new nation through a war of a second independence, and where the institution of slavery lingered in front of mind, that doesn't mean to say that it applied to all who participated. I'm sorry, but the cause of war is seldom a black and white construct. No pun intended. There's often a fair amount of grey. While a questionable democracy, certainly by modern standards, the views on politics and society differed significantly across the South and even among those who held higher command. Within the Confederacy, there was much internal debate already, as one can recognise from the Virginia Secession Convention alone. The likes of General Patrick Redwayne Cleburne come to mind, by no means an abolitionist, but a realist and a flexible thinker, and among others saw this as a war of independence at all costs, even if that begrudgingly included the arming of slaves for Confederate service in exchange for their freedom. And he wasn't the first sharer of certain sentiments. He would also be impeded in his efforts, opposed by generals like William H.T. Walker and William B. Bate. Robert E. Lee, among many others, saw slavery as a necessary evil, clearly did not approve of the practice, although complicit, participated, felt like he was somehow the victim, sure, nevertheless felt that it was a necessity for the time being. And then you have Henry Alexander Wise, and yes, we'll come to that. There were higher-ranking individuals of the Jewish faith, such as Judah P. Benjamin, And there were those who would serve with distinction, having elected to pursue a means of wealth through that peculiar institution. What is my point? Is it intended to defend the Confederacy, to cast my lot with other lost cause propagators? Not at all. It's just to highlight that the Confederacy itself was a cluster-cluck of various views, including the ugly, the overly hypocritical, and sometimes even, sadly, understandable for the time. Whether it be the defence of hearth and home, the revenge against those who'd taken said home away, to their own perceptions of honour, loyalty to their home state, to the reasonable fear, even if propagandised, of future insurrection. The Nat Turner Rebellion and the Haitian Revolution still being fresh within the collective psyche, to the horror of an accepted biracial society. Oh no! This was, though, a considerable concern for both the North and the South of this period. Just ask the Commander-in-Chief. What this movie does achieve is to highlight some of the different views, certainly from the perspective of adolescence, while also proving unapologetic with recognising and presenting the ugly of the supposed noble cause for secession. Among one of the earlier scenes includes our protagonist as a child venturing forth into a slave auction house that includes the forced separation of family and coerced reproduction for future enslavement. For a PG-13 rating, it doesn't shy away from confronting the grotesque when it comes to chattel slavery. There's the common criticism with how the narrative props up the cadets, elevating their progressive and collective moralities to represent them in a positive light for modern audiences. Well, yeah, and while I can be critical of the cliché of good and evil tropes employed, I didn't think this pro-Confederate necessarily, more pro-cadet.
Well now, evening, Judge.
Like their friendship and trade with old Judge, the slave cook at the Virginia Military Institute and played by Keith David, does it present the cadets within a positive light? Yeah, sure. What of Captain Chinook?
And hanging is the consequence a slave pays for stealing food.
Not so much. What of when they aid a young woman with her leg trapped beneath a collapsed wagon? Again, sure. But what of the rank and file who continued without breaking from the lines and that proceeded?
You're gonna be okay now. Promise.
Thank God. Thought you had a sudden attack of humanity.
Again, not so much. What of John C. Breckinridge committing essentially children to engage with the enemy, some appearing much younger than what would be argued as plausible? Again, not a great look for the desperate Confederacy. Need I continue? Right, I think I have been gracious enough and to this point might be harangued as a lost causer from the South Pacific. But while I found it clunky and disjointed in its weaving of narrative, this movie presented a clear depiction of slavery and causality from the outset. Whatever. Now it is time to unleash that critical streak. What are the prominent historical figures portrayed in this tantalizing epic? Well, you have Tom Skerritt as Ulysses S. Grant.
Do you see me as a monster, Mr. President?
Essentially to present him as the bloody butcher and not at all a tired narrative.
Well, sir, that may be precisely what we need.
And upon his very first meeting with Abraham Lincoln, no less. Immediately, we have an interpretation that would receive the smiling nod and admiration of old Jube.
I will destroy everything my enemy loves and anything it might give you the means or the hope to prevail.
The scenes with Grant and Lincoln are entirely pointless, other than to present them as villains within this tale.
That there's your Grant, Johnny. That's how he is.
The dynamic of heroism and villainy is also a huge part of the problem with this film, being far more compelling to have a cadet among them who was unashamedly pro-slavery, a real fire-breathing secessionist. Like, say, I don't know, Henry Alexander Wise?
You're not coming?
John, I've never known you to need help making up your own mind.
Sure, he isn't the most simplistic historical figure to analyse. He would become an opponent to the transatlantic slave trade, and with respect to Brazil, but he remained an earnest advocate and champion for the preservation of slavery in Congress, had ordered the seizure of the Harper's Ferry arsenal, and made his views rather plain in favour of secession through the waving of a pistol amid the 1861 Virginia Secession Convention.
Wasn't it your father, the governor, who opposed secession? You old fool.
Who else? Well, I enjoyed Jason Isaacs' turn as John C. Breckinridge.
If Warden and Eccles are delayed, in reserve to fight. And if we have to put those children in to fight, then what kind of dire circumstances will they find themselves in?
While Breckinridge advocated for slavery's preservation and on the Democrat ticket, he was certainly a more eccentric, perhaps odd fellow. With how he conversed with the cadets and prior to the Battle of Newmarket and per the film, it wouldn't even surprise me if this was concluded as a fair representation. I'm serious. This is the general who after the Battle of Stones River would lament, "My orphans, my poor orphans," as he fed them piecemeal into the maelstrom he held of an old-school chivalry, while seeking to aggrandize his charge, criticizing those who would discipline those of his command. In other words, there was limited discipline under his leadership, and he was very much a political general. He's an interesting figure, and Jason Isaacs here is again a standout amid the schmaltz. And herein lies the biggest problem with this film. Beyond the decent enough contributions from Jason Isaacs as John C. Breckinridge, there's little else here. The cadets are rather wooden, generic stereotypes one would normally encounter with this fare. The stilted dialogue doesn't help matters, and there's the forced and contrived side stories. Whether that be Moses Ezekiel dreaming of his future sculpting exploits, the saccharine romance between star-crossed lovers who can't hold a conversation.
You need to come inside?
Well, I better not, given my recent problems with conversation.
Or the son of a reformed politician turned abolitionist, now seeking to defend his home state while pressing for progressive change. There's just nothing to connect with, to maintain interest, unless a enthusiast for this history patiently awaiting for the final Battle of Newmarket. And then it arrives. While I craved for more of that Gettysburg style, where I'd like to witness the blunder of Julius Stahel's forlorn charge into the teeth of Confederate artillery, or to the bungling of Franz Siegel's command, or to the sound tactical generalship of Breckinridge in this instance, his high point in service to the Confederacy, while also performing well in the Valley with Early. But alas, and while expectedly overindulgent and with much exaggeration for the VMI cadets' contributions, no matter how brave and admirable within the realm of reality, it does leave much to be desired. Upon second viewing, and for this purpose, I did though find a newfound appreciation for poor old Franz Siegel, pressured to move before he felt himself adequate to prepare for what would come next.
If we do not reach Newmarket Gap before Breckinridge gathers his troops, it will be too late.
If I advance before I'm comfortable, that will be too early. And early comes before late.
I had encountered this viewpoint before, and in somewhat of a lukewarm defense. Franz Siegel, was he one of the worst generals of the American Civil War? That is where one delves into the very much subjective armchair generalship at its finest, and with the benefit of much hindsight. The candidate that often comes to mind, gets a right berating, is George Brinton McClellan, or Little Mac. While not a fan, he does get some overtly embellished flack, considering the sheer volume of bad. Perhaps I might now proceed to next walk where many have already strolled. Have some fun with where I'm right interested, and beyond the field of lost shoes. Let us see if I also find my soles lost in the mud.